system, my community is from Ravelry. Like
Amazing.
these are the people who are my friends, and they're truly my friends. They're people who come together in support of each other when terrible things happen, or they celebrate great things that happen. But that's through social media.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's yeah, you're so right. And Pussy Hat was really figuring out how to harness social media for good. And yes, they're trolls. Yes, we have silos, but this is trying to figure out a way to reach out from that. And what's really kind of exciting, particularly with Welcome Blanket, is there are a bunch of people who are following us who just joined and all they have for pictures are welcome blankets. And just the idea that people chose to join social media to join in on the conversation of welcome blanket, I think is just just really incredible. And yeah, I think Ravelry is a little bit overwhelming, but I love what you're saying. Sort of being more of a novice knitter. I think it's incredible, and I check in from time to time. And I think it's like this. I think it's this pearl. I don't know if you read. There was an article in the New York Times that this woman wrote about education, and she talked about Ravelry and how she'd look at all these different projects on Ravelry, and maybe there are things about the projects that you could pick apart, but everyone was chiming in with, wow, I love your color choice, or I love your pattern. And it was this supportive environment, not one that tears down. And what I love about Ravelry is that people really understand that sort of building something is not easy. And I think there's a lot of support in that way. And I think it is a really good example of what like an online community can be. I've actually never seen anything mean on Ravelry, which maybe
I mean, I have. Maybe I've spent a little more time on it.
more time on there, but still, it's I don't know. Like, it's sort of for spaces. Like, do you feel like that is a place where like people are particularly supportive, or
Yeah, I think it certainly can be. I mean, with both of my kids, I was in sort of birth month groups with other pregnant moms at the same time.
oh,
Uh,
that's so cool.
so there were times that so I started knitting about 7 years ago, and there have been times in there that I haven't knit all that much when I had newborns in the house and things like that. But even when I wasn't
Your hand,
knitting,
yeah,
but
sure.
even when I wasn't knitting, I still thought of myself as a knitter because I was still active on Ravelry.
That's so cool. And I love that, sort of that, sort of my response of like, it's kind of overwhelming is like, I didn't even know that part existed. I think because it's so rich and it's so full and there are so many groups, I think it might have been you who told me this. And if it's not, I apologize. But that there are groups of people who like to untangle yarn. And
Yeah.
you can send them yarn and they'll untangle it for you. And I mean, what a wonderful example of that there really is something for everyone. And being someone who tangles my yarn and does not like to untangle it, I'm very appreciative that people like that do exist. It's like this incredible symbiotic relationship. So
Yeah.
yeah, you make me want to get on right after I talk.
And I think Instagram has also, I mean, Instagram is such a wonderful place because it does mostly avoid sort of all this snark and terrible stuff about Twitter and Facebook.
Mm.
I'm sure it exists, but you can sort of shield yourself from all of that and just see wonderful pictures of blankets and kids and pets.
I love our Instagram feed. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought that much about Instagram as sort of a way to build a social community
Mhm.
prior to the Welcome Blanket project. I think
Mhm.
that's when I really realized that you can sort of discover other people who with similar interest and sort of
Mhm.
share this whole communal experience.
Yeah, and it's what I think is really exciting too is that when you think of craft, it takes a while. It's so not digital, it's totally analog. And how incredible is it that there's actually this digital community of analog makers.
And I can share
Like
20 pictures of the creation of my blanket.
I love that though. Like I love looking through the hashtag and sometimes I don't know how they show up later, but I'll find things like, in sort of the stack of things, and it's really cool to see sort of more about people who are making them and what they're writing about. And I love the works in progress because you kind of get to see people's thought processes too.
And the first time we ever met in person, you said, "You look familiar."
Yeah.
Because of Instagram.
I know. And when I think of you, like I actually see your Instagram, sort of name sort of like in my head before Kelly, because I feel like I met you that way.
Yeah.
I think I reposted a whole bunch of your stuff too.
I was interested about the kinds of questions that you hear about Welcome Blanket, in part because I'm often sitting in the exhibit space and hear questions in person from people. Yeah. And that surprise me because they're not the kinds of questions that I think about. And one of those is sort of related to this conversation we're having is that so many people come into the space and say, how did people find out about this? How did they know to send in these blankets? Mm-hmm. And, so that because I'm so deeply involved in the knitting community, it didn't occur to me that people wouldn't know how these things get disseminated.
Oh, that's so interesting. What are the other questions that you hear?
Well, the question I hear most that is just so surprising, I suppose it shouldn't be, is people saying, how close are you to the goal? People are sort of really fixated on this idea of the 2,000 miles. And I've gotten into conversations with people on Ravelry who say, well, how are you counting quilts? And, I'm not sure I was very accurate in the number of yards I wrote down. And I was like, well, we're just sort of counting blankets and, but maybe it shouldn't be surprising. Maybe it makes sense, but it sort of catches me off guard every time that I think, well, I don't know. Look how cool this project is. It doesn't matter if you meet the goal or not.
Interesting. Well, with that one, I have to tell you that I was staying up late at night worried about whether we'd meet our goal for a while, but then when I came last week, I have been sleeping very soundly. So I'm pretty sure. And if anyone's listening and interested, because we have ones that are both quilted and knit and crocheted, I set it up so that people would tell us how many yards, just because, if we can input it, we'll input it. And as we kind of went along, we're like, okay, we're not going to totally know each one and how this goes. So we knew that some were way more than the 1,200 we expected, and some were quilted. And so we gave it a basic like 12 or 1,300 yards per, and we've been using that as a multiple. So if people have been writing it down, I thank you so much. And that's great. And we'll have that information to make sure, we're really more on it. But that's sort of what we've been doing. But in terms of questions, I get the question of where did this come from? A bunch. And I really should have a 20-second answer, but it's kind of long-winded. But, I think I get that one a lot. And then I also get, even like more often than actually getting questions, when people find out about it, they start talking about their family history. And it's for some people, it's extraordinarily personal, and for others, much less so. And people sort of wanting to know, even people who don't know are like, wow, I'm going to have to, check. Like, I know I'm from, South America at some point, but I think we might be part European, like sort of not totally sure. And I really like that part. And I get a lot of questions of like, where do you come up with these things? Big, kind of unwieldy. And a lot of people who are very nervous that their blanket might not be correctly, perfectly sized. Given knitting, I've seen your knitting. It's very good. But mine are not always as exact as could be. So that one's pretty great. And also a lot of times, like, how do I get involved? Like that's a really big one. And then where do I send them after December? Which is like the one that I've been getting since the end of October. So those are sort of the larger ones, but it's yeah, it's this wonderful project, and I think people are really giving of themselves, and it's it's really it's a really special thing because it's this blur space between architecture and design and art and craft and community kind of all bundled into one. And so that's a big one. Oh, and then where are they going after? And
Mm-hmm.
that's a really big one too, which is actually underway and going pretty well. Part of these projects is that I've been told that usually people spend a year planning them before they out, and this was pretty close to immediate. So what's kind of exciting is going through this rolling process, and sort of building it and having a good sense of what's coming up next and how to do it, but also kind of filling things in and being flexible as it progresses, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah, we've definitely had to do that on the cataloging side as
Yes.
well.
Yes, and thank you. Because you've been inundated with these and sort of figuring out sort of like the capacity of the number of people who are there, and like how do you freeze all these blankets, and how do you catalog them in a way that both is possible but also like consistent, which I'm sure you can talk to personally really, really well.
Yeah,
Thank you so much
it's
for doing it.
the interesting thing to me is how different people in the cataloging process are interested in different parts of it. So
Hmm,
I always want to be the person typing the notes. I'm
interesting.
much less interested in any of the rest of it. I want to see those notes, and I like data entry and databases, and
Mhm.
so that piece of it is really appealing to me, is sort of getting this data cleanly into a database.
So
But there
cool.
are people who are not at all interested in typing, and they're always shying away from that, and are much more interested in like taking pictures of the blankets or measuring them, putting
Hmm.
them into bags. And so it's great that different people have different interests. Like I actually started bringing my own laptop when I come so I can make sure there's a laptop for me to type on. so
Amazing, and thank you.
so I don't get stuck on another job, because I love I love typing the notes in. I've had days, especially like the day of the Charlottesville rally. I was just so depressed going into the Smart Museum. Like that whole morning, I was just like, the world is terrible. What's going on?
I
But I
know.
got there and I started seeing these blankets and reading these notes, and I was just, it lifted my spirit. By the time I left there, I was in such a better mood and said, no, the world is not terrible. There are terrible things happening. There may be
Mhm.
terrible people, but the world is not terrible. There are still good people. There are still good things happening.
It's so good to hear, because part of the dream of this project is that when people come here, that they might turn on the news and some other tragic event is happening, or something that is particularly xenophobic is happening, which we are seeing basically every day. But they'll receive this blanket and one of these notes and know that there's someone who doesn't even know them, who wants them to be there. And then, thanks to all the people creating this database, they can go online and see that there are thousands of other people who also wanted to write this person a note, of welcome. And a lot of the hope is really understanding that, there is this incredible human side to us, and that peaceful making can be a very powerful action. Um, I did the same thing on that weekend of Charlottesville. I knit up a storm, because it was like, what do you do? How do you react? Like, how can we create sort of more peace in the world?
Mm-hmm.
More something that can make it better. And I think that is one way to work towards that.
Yeah, I'm sure I've said this on this podcast before, but I have knit every single day of the Trump administration.
Wow.
That's been really important to me. Even if I can only carve 10 minutes out, I'm going to knit every single day. And
Mm-hmm.
nearly every day has been I worked a little bit on a sweater for myself, but nearly every one of those days of knitting has been pussy hats or welcome blankets or shawls for people who sort of needed some